everybody, it's Emily Darg Schooling, and today I'm going to be finally bringing you the Level 6 updated book list for Build Your Library. I know this has been very anticipated and it's taken me a little bit longer than I meant it to get together, but I finally have the full book list. So at the time of this going up, you should be able to find the whole list hyperlinked on my website so that you can easily shop if you want to do that, but it'll be there. I'm very excited about it. So I'm just going to kind of quickly go through this. I don't want this video to take hours to film because then I'm going to have to edit all of that. So we're going to try to be concise. I'm going to start with the history books, and I'm going to kind of rush through a little bit because a lot of these are carryover from level 5, and I don't really feel like we need to discuss them too in depth because I've already done that in the level 5 video if you want to go check that out. I'll link it either up here or in the description. And so the ones that are carryovers are going to be an Indigenous Peoples History of the United States for young people, a different mirror, a history of multicultural America for young people, our country's presidents, a complete encyclopedia of the U.S. presidents, and this is by National Geographic. We Were There Too, Young People in U.S. History by Philip Hoos. The Smithsonian American History, a Visual Encyclopedia, Words That Built a Nation, Voices of Democracy That Have Shaped America's History, and this is put together by Marilyn Miller, Ellen Scordato, and Dan Tucker. What the Eagle Sees, Indigenous Stories of Rebellion and Renewal by Eldon Yellowhorn and Kathy Lowinger. Heart and Soul, The Story of America and African Americans by Kadir Nelson, and Which Way to the Wild West by Steve Sheinkin. The rest of these are just in level 6, and so we have another Steve Sheinkin book because I cannot resist. His stuff is so much fun. This is Two Miserable Presidents, The Amazing, Terrible, and Totally True Story of the Civil War. I love the way he presents history in such a fun and interesting way, and it's very in-depth. We have This Land is Our Land, A History of American Immigration by Linda Barrett Osborne. Again, this is such a great way to introduce immigration. It goes really well, I think, too, with a different mirror, and that they both cover kind of the same topics but in different ways. And I actually think this one goes a little bit more in depth on certain topics, like specifically about like refugees and stuff. So I think this is a great resource. I have Red Cloud, A Lakota Story of War and Surrender by S.D. Nelson. This is a beautiful book. I love the illustrations in it. I have Wheels of Change, How Women Rode the Bicycle to Freedom with a Few Flat Tires Along the Way by Sue Macy. This honestly was just fun. I found it sort of accidentally while I was looking for something else entirely, and when I read the synopsis, I was just intrigued. This is just a really interesting little, like, obscure history about bicycles, and I just thought it was a really interesting look into history about something you don't really think about. Like, we all have a bicycle at some point in our lives, and you don't really think about how it came to be. So I thought that would be fun for kids to read about. Then I have The Great American Dust Bowl by Don Brown, which is a graphic novel history about the Dust Bowl, and it's really well done. Like, I learned a lot from this, honestly, and I think it's very well put together. I love the illustrations in it and how concise the information is. It's very readable. I have Fred Korematsu Speaks Up by Laura Atkins and Stan Yogi. This is a great little peek into Japanese internment, and it's written in a really interesting way because the first half of each chapter is like written in verse. So you have this sort of poem story to tell you about what's happening in his life, and then it gives you some more historical background to go with that, and it's just a really well put together book. Lots of photographs and sidebars and lots of information about just everything you'd want to know about Japanese internment and the life of this particular man, Fred Korematsu, and how he fought the case and got it all the way to the Supreme Court in order to prove that Japanese internment was unconstitutional. And then finally, the last history book I have for you is Through My Eyes by Ruby Bridges. I loved this. This is just such a wonderful book, in that it's her as an adult, like reflecting back and telling her story, both like as she lived it as a small child and how she felt at the time, but also as an adult processing what happened and like knowing the full story as an adult and understanding like why those things were happening and how it came to be. And I just think it's done in such a great way that you as the parent are going to get a lot out of it, but it's also really well done for children, and just tons and tons of like great photography to go along with. So I loved this. So those are all of the history books in level 6. So now let's talk about the literature that you'll be reading in level 6. Some of them are carryovers, but most of these are new. So we're going to start with The Giver by Lois Lowry. This is one of my favorite dystopian books, and I believe I actually had it in level 6 originally as a reader, and I decided I would rather write a literature guide for it, so I made it a literature read instead of an independent reader, because I just think that there's so much you can take from this book. It's wonderful to read together and discuss. Next, I have The Not So Boring Letters of Private Nobody by Matthew Landis. This is a book about a boy who is assigned to do this project on the Civil War, and he is just so excited because he is a Civil War buff. He does the reenactments, he's really into the battles, and he finds out it has to be a project with a partner, and he's partnered with this girl who he considers stupid and is very frustrated when she picks the project for them, and they're assigned to write about this soldier he's never heard of who died before he was even in battle. And so he's frustrated with this project with his partner, and the story is about like learning that history's more than what you think it is, and that we so often romanticize things that shouldn't be romanticized, and that we should learn to look past our initial ideas about what we think something is and dig deeper and read more primary sources and learn the full story. I just think it's such a great way to present that to kids. Next, I have Sugar by Jewel Parker Rhodes. And this is a story about a girl who lives on a sugar plantation. This is just after the Civil War, and the Emancipation Proclamation states that they're all free, but yet she's still on this plantation, and her parents have died, and she's just sort of stuck there, and she's frustrated. She's best friends with the boy who lives in the big house, and it's sort of learning like what is her place now in the world. And it's just really well done, and I just fell in love with this little girl, and I think you will too. Next, I have In the Footsteps of Crazy Horse by Joseph Marshall III. I bought this ages ago, and I've just been like waiting to find a place for it in something. This is a story about a boy learning about the history of Crazy Horse from his grandfather as they tour the places where Crazy Horse once was, and it's just a really nice like road trip story. And I've got a map project in the lesson plans that I'm planning, like where you get to like trek the journey with them. Then I have Prairie Lotus by Linda Sue Park, which is probably my favorite book in this level. I loved this so much. I already love Linda Sue Park's writing, so when I found out about this book, I was just so excited. I had to have it. And this is a story about a girl who's half Chinese and her father, and they're trying to find a place to call their home. But it's hard for her to fit in because people are very prejudiced against Chinese people. I love that Linda Sue Park wrote this as sort of a tribute and counter to the Little House in the Prairie series, because she said she grew up watching that and loved it, but always thought that, you know, it could have been more diverse and it could have been handled better. So this is her way of doing that, and I just love the way she wrote it. Next, I have Chasing Secrets by Jennifer Childenko, and this is a story that takes place in San Francisco around the turn of the century, and it's about a girl dealing with the fact that she can't be what she wants to be. Her father's a physician, and she helps him sometimes, and she really wants to be more of that, but her mother has also died, and so she's being raised by her father, but also by her aunt, who is just very much like, you're going to be a society girl. And so she's struggling against that. And also there's a mystery about a boy who's in her house that isn't supposed to be there. There's just a lot going on. There's a pandemic, which, but it's nice to read about historically when things like that happened, and it got better. But anyway, this is just a great book, and I really enjoyed it. Next, I have When You Reach Me by Rebecca Stead, which, again, one of my favorite middle grade books, and I just never found a good place for it, and so I decided it fits here in level 6. So this is a story about kind of a time travel story, but it's sort of inspired by A Wrinkle in Time. And I love this story so much. It takes place in the 1970s, and this girl is living in New York City, and weird things are happening. She keeps getting these weird notes, and she doesn't quite know what they mean. She's having issues with her best friend, and it's just this really beautiful story. Next, I have Hattie, Big Sky by Kirby Larson. This is a really wonderful story about a girl who has never really had a place of her own. She's been shuffled from family member to family member her whole life because her parents died when she was very young. And she's sent a letter from an uncle that she didn't even know she had, that he's giving her this plot of land that he has. He bought a homestead in Montana and he died, and he left it to her in his will if she wants to take it. And then, of course, she decides finally this is going to be my place, and she takes it. And it's the story of her trying to figure out how to homestead on her own as a 16-year-old girl. And it's just such an interesting story, very well done. I loved it. It made me want to homestead, which is ridiculous because I am allergic to the air, basically. I can't be anywhere near a farm ever because I just explode with allergies. So I can't do that, but I loved reading about it. Then I have The Harlem Charade by Natasha Tarpley. This book was so much fun. Again, it takes place in New York City, in Harlem, and it's about these three kids who are solving a mystery while also working on a school project together about their own city of Harlem and learning about the history of Harlem, and it's just such a great story. I love that it's so diverse. All of the main characters are people of color, which is just great to see in middle grade. And I just think the story was a lot of fun. Next, I have Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz Ryan. Loved this. This is a story that takes place during the Dust Bowl, during the Great Depression in the 1930s, and it's about a girl who lived in wealth in Mexico. Her father was a rancher. They had everything. She's kind of spoiled. And when her father dies, she and her mother have to flee to America to be safe from her uncles who are trying to take over the ranch. And now she's thrust into this poverty that she's never experienced. And it's interesting to watch her struggle and learn that she can be more than just that pretty society girl that she was raised to be. The next two books are books that were already in level 6, and that is Farewell to Manzanar and One Crazy Summer. So these were already in level 6, so I'm not going to discuss them in depth, but this is about the Japanese internment, and this is about the civil rights movement, but particularly in Oakland, California, and their mothers involved the Black Panther movement, and so it's a really great story. And then the last book in the literature section is Ghost Boys by Jewel Parker Rhodes. I broke my rule. I try really hard not to have too many books by the same author, but this book was just, I couldn't resist putting it in. It was perfect for the level, and I just think it's such an important book. I don't even fully know how to discuss it yet because it kind of broke me a little bit, and it's just very, it's sad but important, and this is a story about a boy who is shot by a police officer because the officer thought he had a gun, and he didn't, but he had a toy gun, and it's his story, he's telling it out of sequence, sort of, it starts with him dying, and then he's a ghost, and he's sort of watching everything happen, the media circus and everything that's happening around it, and he meets another ghost boy who introduces him to this world of ghost boys who are all still stuck in limbo because their stories haven't fully been told. And it's beautiful and sad, but so important. And I had to include it. So those are all of the literature books that are included in level 6. Next, we'll jump into the readers. This first book is Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales, The Underground Abductor, and it's a graphic novel, nonfiction story about Harriet Tubman, and it's very well done. I need to read more of these because I've always meant to try some of the Nathan Hale series, but I never did, so I finally picked up one of them, and I really like it. Then I have Silent Thunder, a Civil War story by Andrea Davis Pinckney, and this is a story about a a brother and sister who are enslaved during the Civil War and their experiences. Then I have March Toward Thunder by Joseph Bruchak, and this is a story about a Native American boy who fights in the war. And that's just not a perspective you see very often, so I really wanted to include that. Then I have The Prairie Thief by Melissa Wiley, which is a carryover. This was already in level 6 originally, and I just love this book about a little girl who meets this strange little creature and solves a mystery. Then I have Dragon's Gate by Lawrence Yep. Yeah, this is a story about Chinese in America and their contribution to American society in that time. Then I have Chickadee by Louise Erdrich, and this is part, I think, book 4 of the Birchbark House series. I jumped ahead a little bit so we could line it up historically, but this is a story that I bought initially because when we read the Birchbark House with my youngest, she decided the little baby brother's name was Chickadee. She like latched onto that. She named him Chickadee. And so when I saw that like there is a child named Chickadee in the series, she needed to have this book because I just thought that was too cute of a coincidence. So I decided this actually fit really well as a reader in this level. It's about twin brothers, and you know, it's just I love reading twin stories, and it's just a really cute little story. Next, I have Stargazing by Jen Wang. This is a graphic novel that, again, I bought for my 11-year-old because she's really into reading graphic novels, but it also fit really nicely within the level as a reader. And this is a story that's sort of based on the author's life about a brain tumor she had that made her hallucinate these things, and she thought she wasn't supposed to be here. She thought she was part of this alien world. And I don't know how else to explain it, but it's just a really interesting story. It's about Chinese Americans, modern day, and like Buddhism and stuff is mentioned. It's just a really interesting story, and I really enjoyed it. Then I have Letters from Rivkah by Karen Hesse, which was also already in level 6, and I love this book. It still fit really well in the level. This is about a girl, her family are Jewish, and they're coming to America from Russia, but she gets stuck in immigration because she's sick, and they won't let her come through until she's well. So it's her experiences writing letters to her friends and family and just like journaling this experience of being stuck and not knowing for sure if she's going to be able to come through or be sent back. Immigrant Kids by Russell Friedman, which was also already in level 6, so I'm not going to discuss in depth. It's great information and wonderful photography. Next, I have Darby by Jonathan Scott Fuqua. This is actually already in level 6, but it was scheduled as a literature, and I just changed it to be a reader because it fit better that way. It was sort of like putting together a puzzle with this book list. Like some things I wanted to keep, but they ended up having to shift around to fit better. Then I have Silver People, Voices from the Panama Canal by Margarita Engel, and this is a novel in verse. It's about the building of the Panama Canal and the people who built it. Then I have Finding Langston by Lessa Klein Ransom. This is about a boy who discovers a book of Langston Hughes poetry, and it sort of helps him to cope with the loss of his mother. I really liked the way the poetry was woven into the story, because of course we're studying Langston Hughes poetry as well, so it's a really great tie-in to have a story about someone being inspired by his poetry. Next, we have Alice Paul and the Fight for Women's Rights by Deborah Copps. I really wanted to include this, but I will say a caveat that it's a little bit closer to a YA read than middle grade, so if your child is a little bit on the younger end of the spectrum, this book might be a challenge, but it's a really well done book. There's nothing inappropriate or anything like that. It's just more difficult reading, I suppose. But again, it's a great biography about her. Lots of photography. I love when books include lots of pictures because I know as a kid, I always wanted to see what people looked like. So that's great to have. Okay, then I have Stella in Starlight by Sharon M. Draper, and this is about a girl living in the segregated South in the 1930s. So it's a Great Depression story, but also kind of a Jim Crow story, so it kind of bridges into the civil rights era. Then I have Trinity, a graphic history of the first atomic bomb by Jonathan Fetter Vorm. I bought this, I think, when I was writing level 11, and it didn't fit in there. And then I just kind of kept trying to find a place for it in something. This is a really well done graphic history of the building of the atomic bomb. We're almost to the end here. I have The Length of a String by Elisa Brent Weissman. This book is really interesting because it's about modern day, but it's also reflecting back on World War II. So this is a story about a girl named Imani who is adopted into a Jewish family. And so she's raised a Jew, but she's black. As the story is told, she's preparing for her bat mitzvah, and her parents have told her that she can ask for anything she wants in lieu of having a big party. Like, she's going to get a gift. And so the thing she wants most is to find out who her birth family is. She wants to know more about where she came from. And as she's like trying to come up with a way to ask for this, because she's afraid it's going to make her parents sad, she discovers the diary of her great-grandmother who just died, and learns the story of how she came to America during World War II. Imani is learning the history of her adopted family while also contemplating where she comes from. It's just a really well done story. Next, I have 90 Miles to Havana, and this is about brothers who escape from Cuba. They come to live in Miami and their experiences with being refugees in America. And then finally, the last book I have is A Galaxy of Sea Stars by Jean Zulik-Ferullo. 11-year-old Izzy is the main protagonist, and her father comes back from Afghanistan, and where he was working as an interpreter, and he brings home this family to live in the marina. And the town is a little bit prejudiced towards them because they're Muslim, and she befriends the daughter named Sitara, and it's just a really heartwarming story about fighting prejudice and racism, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of The Wish Tree, which is on the same kind of topic and also very beautifully done. Finally, lastly, we'll talk briefly about the poetry. I only added one new book, and I sort of did a rearrange. So at the beginning of the year, you'll be reading Edgar Allan Poe, then Langston Hughes, and then at the end of the year, the last term, you'll study the poetry of Maya Angelou. That is it. That is the entirety of the book list of level 6. I didn't touch on the science because that didn't change. So that's still as is, but otherwise, this is it. I'm very excited. It's not ready yet. The update will go up by the end of the month. I'm still doing the finishing touches on everything, so I'm very excited to have it ready for you guys. I'm going to leave all the links down below for you to learn more about level 6 if you want to check out the book list again and go do your shopping or whatever. Learn more about the level and build your library in general. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Happy reading. Bye!